used to be the biggest competition in the world until UEFA decided to ruin it. When you think about the Champions League, you think about some of the most iconic names and moments in the game. Ronaldo's bicycle kick versus Juventus in 2018, Messi's goal versus Real Madrid in 2011, and the lesser-known teams making it out of the group stages and into the knockouts, all made for an exciting competition that people would give anything to watch. Except now UEFA has capitalized on it and ruined it, and you're about to find out how. See guys, when UEFA made this announcement, it shocked the world. Millions of people had fallen in love with the competition already. I mean, it had its faults, but the Champions League was the elite European competition the world had come to love. The format was simple. 32 of the best teams on the continent competed in the group stage, and after that, the best 2 teams got to advance to the knockout phase, while the teams that finished third in the competition dropped down to the Europa League. Once again, it wasn't perfect, but we loved it still. Over the years, there had been talk about UEFA increasing the size and the number of teams, especially because it had been a long while since they'd made any major changes to the competition. The first European Cup. 16 teams participated in the competition that year, the likes of AC Milan, Rapid Wien, AGF Aarhus, Reims, PSV Eindhoven and Real Madrid, who happened to be the eventual winners, just to name a few. The competition continued to progress over the years, and as more and more top teams entered the competition, it gained bigger traction. And it had gotten to the point where by 1992, UEFA now realized they had the opportunity to rebrand what could potentially become the best club competition in the world. It's important to understand that by this point, football had become a global sport, and in turn, the market revenue and commercial revenue and risen to an insane level. There was an increased demand for a more dynamic and inclusive competition. Teams and sponsors liked the idea, but they wanted more participation too. Clubs and broadcasting partners got in on the action, and if you worked at UEFA at the time, the only thing you'd have been able to see would have been a goldmine staring at you in the face. By 1992, UEFA had made the decision. It was no longer going to be called the European Cup. Instead, this was going to be the new Champions League. Truth is, it wasn't just a change in the name that followed. The structure had shifted as well. In previous editions, when it was still the European Cup, only the teams that won their national competitions could participate in the competition. It was exclusively for winners. What this meant was that if Manchester City won the Premier League and Barcelona won La Liga, for example, only Manchester City and Barcelona would be able to compete in the Champions League in England and Spain. But with the new Champions League format, there was more inclusivity. Now teams that finished second or third in the high-profile leagues could qualify and compete in the competition as well. But perhaps the biggest upgrade in this one was the format of the competition itself. UEFA had introduced the group stage, and it was a win-win. From the playing aspect, it meant the competition featured the best teams on the continent battling for European football's biggest prize. The likes of Real Madrid and Barcelona in one league, Manchester United and Liverpool, all in the same competition. It guaranteed to a very large extent high-quality football. From the commercial aspect, it was simple. More games meant more revenue from ticket sales, and more money from broadcast partners and sponsors came in and offered bigger sponsorship deals. Because of how watched the competition was, there was the chance for more brands to pay and get their products and services advertised. In essence, the competition made television rights and global branding even bigger, and it fell in line with the current status of football as well. As I said, by 1992, football had evolved into a global sport, and that in turn meant footballers weren't just seen as athletes now, they were celebrities in their rights too. The money coming in from sponsorship brands for these guys was massive, and having the best footballers in the world compete in an expanded competition just made a whole load of sense. The competition had been rebranded off the pitch as well. Tony Britton had written that epic anthem for the competition, and straight away it became a banger. The iconic star logo, everything was set. But that the Champions League was rebranded and restructured didn't exactly mean it became the new format we all know today. Now, the 1992-93 season was the first one to see the term Champions League introduced, but in reality the format still stayed the same, and was a bit confusing too. In this format, the league stage came at the end of the knockouts, and what this meant was that instead of a quarter-final and semi-final stage, the 8 teams left in the competition competed in 2 groups of 4, where both winners of each group would meet in the final. The format still largely remained the same in the next season, 1993-1994 that is. But here, unlike the previous seasons, UEFA had added semi-finals to the group stage. These semi-finals were now to act as one-off matches alongside the final as well. By 1994 though, the group stage was now in full effect. The competition had now been rebranded fully into the Champions League, and the format was no longer as confusing. It was easy to understand. The group stages were now doubled to 4 groups, and the quarter-finals were added. Still, the competition continued to expand. From 1992 up to 1997, it was only 16 European elites competing in the competition. But by 1997, because of the calls for more inclusivity, the competition expanded. Instead of 16 teams as before, it was now 24. And for the first time, the runners-up, or teams that finished second in the top-ranked 8 European league at the time, were now added to the competition. The new change added even more healthy drama to the Champions League and made it even more watched. For example, Manchester United had that iconic treble-winning year of 1999 where they won everything, including the Champions League, but going back to the previous season, they finished second in the league to Arsenal, and only qualified for the Champions League because of the new rule change. Which effectively means that if not for the new rule, well, United's most iconic moment in the club's history would never have happened. The competition continued like this until the 2003-04 season, and this, guys, is what laid the foundations for the Champions League as we know it. UEFA made the decision to reduce the number of games needed for each team to win, but in turn increased the number of participating teams. They'd taken off the second group phase and replaced it with the round of 16. Yeah, that stage. The Champions League had come into full gear now. 32 teams, 8 groups, 4 teams in each group. The winners of the 2 group stages would qualify for the knockout phase. Then the round of 16, quarter-finals, semi-finals, and the final. In the knockout phase, from the round of 16 to the semi-finals, each match was being played in a home and away format. The same also applied in the group stage too. The only single format was the final. With this new format, UEFA has done a good thing. As the number increased, it meant that teams outside the top leagues could also participate. And we saw this in full effect in 2004. Porto went on to win the competition with an outside chance, but that's not even the full story. They competed in the final against AS Monaco. Even going back to that time, it didn't seem like what a traditional Champions League final would be. But that was the crazy reality back then. In this new format, anyone could beat anyone. Porto and Monaco competing in the final that year showed that the underdog stood a chance in the competition. 20 years on from that night, and the Champions League is different now. We've seen some modifications over the years, and while some of them have been great, the truth is it's some of these modifications that became the reason or the problem why UEFA had to come up with a competition change recently. I'll tell you about them in a couple of seconds now, but first, see that subscribe button to Mr. Football? Need you to click it so you never miss out on any of the action from the channel. Thanks. Back to it now, and while the old format gave us some of the most unforgettable moments in the competition's history, the old format also had a couple of issues too. And to begin with, it cancelled out the original purpose it was created for: inclusivity. Before the new Champions League format, we were dealing with issues where the Champions League allowed only guaranteed entry to 11 of the 55 UEFA associations represented, and 50% of that number went to the top 4 leagues. We've also seen some incredible rule adjustments over the years. Take, for example, UEFA deciding that teams who won the competition but didn't qualify for via the league phase would still be allowed to compete in the competition next year, under being defending champions. We saw this in 2012. Spurs had an incredible year and finished 4th, but because Chelsea won the Champions League that year, Spurs had to compete in the Europa League. At one point, the Champions League group stages had become lopsided. The story of the underdog almost didn't exist. We saw a couple of famous results like Celtic beating Barcelona in 2013 and Real Madrid losing to Sheriff Tiraspol in 2021. But other than that, the reality was that in the group stage, the lower ranked association teams would always end up as the whipping boys. To this end, there were calls for improvements in the competition and the structure overall, and UEFA finally decided that after the 2023-24 season, which was the last one, another new format was going to take place. It's the one we're dealing with now, and it promised a lot. In the new Champions League format, we can straight away spot a couple of major changes. To begin with, the old group stage format is gone. No more 32 competing in the 8 groups. Instead, all teams now play in one single league phase. Qualification for this one is a bit complicated as well. The top-ranked 8 teams after the league phase is done will qualify for the round of 16, while the teams ranked 9th to 24th will have to battle in a playoff round to determine who joins the other 8 teams in the round of 16. Teams ranked ranks 24th to 36th are automatically knocked out of the competition. And we will get to if this is a good or a bad thing later on. In the single league phase format, there's also another major noticeable change. Teams will no longer play home and away fixtures against the same opponent in the league phase. Instead, out of the 8 matches to be played now, they'll play 4 at home and 4 away from home. Take for example the defending champions Real Madrid. They were drawn against Borussia Dortmund and Liverpool in their league path. After playing Borussia Dortmund at home at the Bernabeu, they will not be playing a return home match away at Signal Iduna Park. The same applies to their Champions League game against Liverpool. After they face Liverpool at Anfield, they won't be playing them at the Bernabeu. According to UEFA's president, the Champions League was changed to offer a rebranded and more exciting competition to the world and to fix the flaws of the old Champions League format. Well, that's what they want us to believe, but the truth is, guys, UEFA only did after the biggest scare they got to the competition's existence in 2021. Although it lasted roughly 12 days, the impact of the European Super League is still being felt today. See guys, the Super League almost destroyed the Champions League after they showed the world what UEFA had been hiding for years. The idea behind the Super League was to have the best teams in the world play each other in a top European league system. Think about it, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, PSG and Juventus, all in the same league, playing each other every week. They didn't even hide it. This was going to be a chance for the rich teams to get even richer by making more money off broadcasting and commercial rights. But there was a reason for that. It was also at a time when the effects of COVID were still hitting hard. The world was still in a lockdown phase. No ticket sales and matches were still being played behind closed doors. It all just meant that clubs weren't making as much as they could, and in return, welcomed the Super League idea as an avenue to balance books and get the extra profit. Fans kicked against the idea though. There was widespread hate against the Super League, and in the end, all English teams backed out. And a couple of days later, the idea of the Super League was put down. The thing is, guys, at that moment when the heat was still on, one of the guys pushing the idea for the Super League, Real Madrid president Florentino Perez, point blank told President Chiverin and UEFA that the Super League was going to save football. Still, in that moment, it's safe to say the world was with UEFA in kicking out against the Super League, but taking a look at the new Champions League format, and maybe we were wrong. There are major faults with this new system, and the most obvious one is that it doesn't care about what the players think. Recently, guys like Rodri and Dani Carvajal came out to complain about the amount of games professional players were having to play weekly, and stressed that the competitions were becoming too many. What does UEFA do? Introduce a system where teams now have to play 2 extra match days in the Champions League to qualify. And if they aren't in the top 8 after the league phase is done, then it's an additional 2 matches in the playoff round just to get to the round of 16. That is a lot of matches. And oh yeah, the 2 guys who complained about this system I just mentioned earlier, Rodri and Dani Carvajal, are both out until late next year. Rodri with a serious knee injury, and Carvajal with an ACL tear. Imagine playing in a league where any team can beat any team. Then there's added cup competition too. In the Premier League, there's the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup. Teams also compete in the Champions League, Europa League, or Europa Conference League, depending on which one they qualify for. And with all that, at the end of the year, we are set to see the introduction of the Club World Cup, a league format that will see the teams who qualified play even more games as well. Mentioned all this, and you still haven't mentioned that in between, players will also have international competitions too. You look at the calendar now and it's a mess. And UEFA decided to add to this mess by introducing a competition with more games. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We loved the old Champions League anthem and never complained, and now it's gone. The new one sounds weird, and I'm not sure hearing this one over and over again will make it any better. It'll take some serious getting used to. So far in the new Champions League format, we've seen a couple of surprising results. Lille beat Real Madrid, Aston Villa beat Bayern Munich, Monaco beat Barcelona. But apart from these 3, every other match has been predictable, so it's kind of difficult to understand what the concept of the exciting new change is. If in reality it's just the same competition we know, what's a different structure? Did talk about the new feature that teams that finish 25th to 36th get knocked out, and the teams that finish 9th to 24th have to compete for a place in the playoffs. Now the losers of these playoffs will join the eliminated teams in staying that way. No one is dropping down to any lower competition anymore, and that's because UEFA has taken that rule off. Sevilla might never win the Europa League again. On this one, it's indifferent to say it's a good or bad thing. Feels more like a positive change as it allows teams in the Europa League to focus on teams in direct competition with them, instead of worrying about possible opponents from the Champions League. Truth is guys, the new Champions League format is like the yearly FIFA EAFC release. Rebranding has a lot of hype, but in the end, it's the same old content. Only somehow they've made it worse by putting player careers at risk. These guys have to play more games and will at some point make the competition dull, because for fear of injuries, teams will push out weaker squads. Who knows, the Super League might come back again, and they could become to UEFA what the UFL is to the EAFC. That's right, Ronaldo's new game might just take down EA's dominance for years. And you can find out how by clicking the next video.